Hey everyone, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday DFS version. It is now week 13. We are flying along the season. I am Scott Jenstad, as always, joined by Andrew Laird. Andrew, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. The week 13 is totally throwing me off. I covered a lot of soccer as well in the Premier Leagues in week 11, and usually they're somewhat even. And I'm oh, it's only 11. And then I went to football, and I was oh, wait a minute, 13 already?
Yeah, it's coming along quick. I felt like the first couple were we're so jonesing for some sports and football, and now it's flying along pretty well. Season-long leagues are about to hit their playoffs. We're hitting the final stretch here in DFS, but it should be fun. It's an interesting slate. Last week, we talked about how every game was high or low in the totals, and there was very little in the middle. And we have the complete opposite.
Yeah.
We have a whole basket between 45 and 50. We got a couple games that are a little bit higher, but nothing that's huge. And, one that Browns Titans is 53.5. That's pretty big. And you got one really low game, but everything's kind of in that middle. It's going to be a week where you have to, figure out which of those middling games are going to go a little crazy.
How would you feel if I told you, before the season that one of the weeks we'd be doing a podcast and Browns Titans was the highest total?
And the second highest was Jaguars Vikings?
Yeah.
You are crazy. You're crazy because the Falcons and Saints play that week, Andrew, and that's obviously the highest total game.
Obviously, that'll be 60.
It is not. Yeah, it's we've come. Every season is gets a little weird by this point, and nothing that matters in week 1 matters in week 13 anymore. Right. Really, I mean, Alvin Kamara is pretty much a guy who gets 5 or 6 carries and then chills on the sideline. So it's yeah, exactly right. So it's been something, but. We have 2 teams on bye this week, believe it or not. We've got Carolina and Tampa Bay with a weird late week 13 bye, which if you do play the season-long league, this is playoff week 1. That's not ideal. That's right awesome. There. We've got 4 other games that are off the slate due to some COVID postponements. We obviously had the Wednesday game with the Steelers Ravens that pushed their games back. That game was terrible, by the way. That was awful football.
Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, right. You delay the game 4 times. You play it on Wednesday afternoon. It just added to no fans too. At least it's on Sunday or at night. You kind of feel like it's normal. That game felt like a practice scrimmage you see in Hard Knocks or something like that. It was so weird, and coaches didn't seem into it. Players didn't seem into it. It was just a weird, strange. It was weird to have that on TV in the middle of the week, but the players seemed like they just want to get past that and move on to the next week. It was a strange game.
It's I mean, when was the last time they would have played a Wednesday game at any level?
Ben Roethlisberger in the MAC, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. I don't think they had MACtion then either. So it's probably been a long time.
Yeah. It was the whole event just felt like let's just get this over with so we can move on. And on the positive side, I think there was an expectation that we'd see a lot more positive Steelers cases just because once a few pop up, they tend to get a little higher, but we haven't seen it yet. So
yeah. No doubt. So we have the Steelers playing Monday night against the Washington football team. That's off our slate this week. Bills and my Niners playing the real Monday night game on Monday. That's off the slate. Cowboys Ravens.
Monday night game.
Well, the original Monday night game, but yeah, the real Monday night game. The one that's actually at night.
Right.
Cowboys Ravens are playing Tuesday because obviously the Ravens had Wednesday, so they got pushed back. That would have been kind of an interesting DFS game. And then Broncos Chiefs. So we lose Mahomes on this slate. They're playing Sunday night football. So. Yeah. Let's jump into this one, though. You mentioned Browns Titans. 53.5 is our highest total of the week. That's Jaguars Vikings is 51. Colts Texans is 50.5. So those are the 3 games that are over 50. And then we've got 2 games under 45. We have Lions Bears at 44.5. Little Bears defense and Bears offense both contribute to that. And then we've got the 42.5 this week. I don't remember we've had that in a while. Bengals at Dolphins, which is probably going to be not a very good football game.
What do you think that total would have been with Burrow?
48.
Yeah, at least almost a touchdown, right?
Yeah, I think about a touchdown. So maybe 49, right in there, right about 6 points. I think that Brandon Allen did not look good. I think the Bengals had 155 yards of total offense last week. It was good, and that was against the Giants. It was gross. The Dolphins have not been favored by double digits since 2006 before this week. So we got 15 years since they've been favored by double digits. So this is definitely a strange one right there.
Yeah, a lot of Jet games in there too.
A lot of that's true. Just for the record, you took the shot at the Jets, not me.
Yeah, no. It's yeah. I mean, they're truths. They're not even shots. Are you playing this assuming Tua plays?
I don't think Tua will play.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it'll be Fitzpatrick, but as I broke down the game, like there were very few guys in that game I was interested in at all, but I did it with the mindset of I thought Fitzpatrick would play, which does affect what you want to do with those receivers, because I'm not playing anybody with Tua right now, and with Fitz, I think someone like Devontae Parker, as we get to receivers, gets pretty playable.
But the line probably doesn't move regardless, right? With the Tua to Fitzpatrick.
I don't think so. I think they're implied maybe a point or two, but like maybe a point. Like I don't think very much.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's jump into it. Running backs this week, we've got a very clear top two, and they're an interesting top two. We got Dalvin Cook at home against Jacksonville, which obviously you see that and you're like, all right, ready to go. You got Derrick Henry up 1,300 from last week after the monster game. They finally priced him up among the elite here, 9,200 on DraftKings, 10,000 on FanDuel. Cook is 10,500 on FanDuel. But I want to talk about Cook for a second. Obviously, he's been awesome all year when he's been healthy. Last week was the first he had 82 yards, which is fewest since week 2. He was 18 for 61. But after the game, there started to be some chatter about maybe he's being overworked. Maybe it's time to kind of ease off the gas a little bit, which, at the price scares you a little bit. You see the matchup. They're at home. They're favored. Like, it's a perfect game script. Are you concerned at all with some of this chatter this week that they may ease off the gas a little bit, especially if they get ahead, maybe use some Alexander Madison? Does that pull you off Cook a little bit at the price this week?
Well, he's also limited in practice this week so far, at least Wednesday, Thursday, with an ankle issue.
Yeah, we actually thought he got hurt in the middle of the game last week. We're like, oh my God, here it is. And then a series later, he was back. But yeah, that's an issue too. It's a good point.
Yeah, I think there's every reason to be very nervous about playing Cook, at least in a cash optimal build, because you're playing him if this was week 3 and he was fully healthy, you wouldn't even think of it. But now it's late in the season. He's had a ton of work. This ankle is a little gimpy. And if they're up big enough, there's really no reason to keep running him into the ground. They have Alexander Madison, who is perfectly serviceable for 12, fourth quarter carries that wouldn't go to Cook if they're up big. I feel like we have had a few times this season where we're depending on Jacksonville getting blown out, and they don't. They actually do a pretty good job of staying in games.
They do. Which
theoretically that keeps Cook in the game. But I'm not as gung-ho about Cook. I assume, he's projected to be the most popular player from what I've seen, which makes sense just from, it's going to take a lowering of his actual projection, and which is a lowering of how many touches he'll get to push that popularity down. But it's not a slam dunk, which is really a bummer because it feels like it should be.
Yeah, and it's funny. You look at the ownership percentage, like you said. If people were kind of backing off him a little bit, it would make him more interesting to me in a GPP environment. But people aren't going to play him. I'm going to take this because he could break a 65-yarder in the first quarter pretty easily, and all of a sudden, you're there already, and then everything else is gravy. But the Jaguars are interesting because, we look at it big favorite. The Jaguars have scored 20 or more points 4 of the last 5 games. They, like you said, they've kind of weirdly hung in games. They did it again last week. They had the one game against Pittsburgh. They got blown out, and Pittsburgh defense just dominated them. But last week against Cleveland, they 2-point conversion away from tying it up. It was 27-25. Green Bay, they played 24-20. Houston, 27-25. Weird, they had the same score twice. But they've hung in games. They had the Chargers game. They lost 39-29. So they've weird. And Mike Glennon last week didn't turn it over, didn't get sacked. I'm not going to go ahead and say he was good, but he kept them in that game. He played all right. And it was kind of like that of a stabilizing veteran guy the week before. I forget who it was. He was probably still Jake Luton. But Cook's so wild because, like you said, he'd be a slam dunk normally. But you got to think if they get up, or even if they don't, I think that maybe they ease off the gas a little bit. And at 9,500, that becomes a big problem pretty fast.
Yeah, you can't ease up on the gas if you're at 9,500.
Exactly.
The Vikings have the highest implied total on the entire slate, and they're double-digit favorites. So that's the running back you usually play.
And he's a freaking stud.
Right, that helps as well. They do get Adam Thielen back, which obviously doesn't directly take away from Cook, but any plays that go to Thielen don't go to Cook. So I think you have to consider that a little bit. But
and Thielen leads all receivers in red zone targets or end zone targets. So it's it matters. If they're on the 7-yard line, suddenly it's easy to drop back and go to Thielen rather than maybe pitch one to Cook. So that does matter a little bit.
Yeah. The fact that Henry is there and has they have the second highest implied total, and they're I think 5.5 point favorites. Obviously, he's not going to catch the passes that Cook does. Cook doesn't. It's not like Cook catches McCaffrey level passes, but it's enough that it gets him there.
Yeah.
So I think I don't think Cook is going to be nearly as popular as he should be in this environment, only because people can easily pivot to Henry, and playing both of them is insanity, though.
Yeah, I agree there, and Henry does make an easy swap if you do want to avoid Cook, but Henry was weird last week. Like, you watch that game against Indy, and usually you're like, Derrick Henry, like, the first quarter, second quarter. Like, by carry 3 of that game, I was like, I'm dead with that.
You texted me so early, and you were like,
so early, right? See,
Henry's going to have a monster game. And I'm like, you never know. And then it was just huge.
He just looked so dominant against that. DeForest Buckner didn't play for Indy, which was huge. He was on the COVID reserve list, and that's huge. I mean, he's probably one of the top 5 interior defensive tackles in the league. And you just tell that defense. Bobby Okereke didn't play either, but he was just, from snap one, it was like, oh God, Derrick Henry's going to dominate. He had 27 for 178, 3 touchdowns. And the crazy thing is Tannehill had a run play option where he scored, where he could have given it to Henry. He was in. Like, you could, if you watch the replay, like, he was a touchdown.
Yep.
So he could have 4 pretty easily. He gets Cleveland this week. Cleveland's been pretty good against the run up until recently. They get him 300-yard rushers the last 6 weeks. Our boy, the podcast favorite player, James Robinson, had 128 yards in them last week. Dude's awesome still, by the way.
Yep.
Good game script for Henry. They're 5.5-point favorites in this game, home against the Browns. The 8-3 Browns, by the way, who came out this week. Football Outsiders said they're the worst 8-3 team in the history of the NFL. Not like their opinion, but actually by like the DVOA numbers and all that. They're actually the worst one ever. So
how about that?
And by the way, if you're a Browns fan, who cares about that? Right?
Yeah.
Ready to go to the playoffs? Like, you're caring zero about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that Henry's there makes it interesting. I don't think Cook is going to be quite as high, maybe, as some of the ownership projection things. Just because, like you said, I think Henry's right there. A little buzz about Cook. It seems like an easy swap over for people, and that makes it a little interesting at GPPs which way you want to go with the top 2.
They're also like fairly more expensive than the others, and so I think there are definitely builds where you don't have either of them. Like, even in cash, which seems a little crazy because usually we want these like reliable points. I don't see how you can argue that Cook is more reliable, at least for this game, than Henry, just in terms of like expected number of touches. But there are guys that are below that. I think if you start playing around with those guys, and then you look at the wide receivers that you can get or the quarterback you can get, it makes you get a little more comfortable fading both Cook and Henry in cash, which just saying it makes me feel a little crazy.
Yeah, no doubt. And so we got like 6 guys in that like 7,000 to 7,700 range, kind of the next. It is a pretty big top down, as you mentioned. We've got Nick Chubb, James Robinson, Aaron Jones, Eckler, Josh Jacobs, and Alvin Kamara. Who jumps out to you from this range right away?
Robinson, right? Could it be anybody else? No.
I love Nick Chubb too, but yeah, Robinson's bolted in my. 7,300 against the Vikings, who I don't think it's a defense that scares us right now anyway, and just. He has 96.5% of their backfield carries. There's no other Jaguar that has more than 7 carries on the year.
That's wild.
An impossible stat. Like it's like literally Christian McCaffrey from 2019 usage in terms of like snaps and touches and all that compared to the rest of his team. Obviously, he doesn't get the receptions McCaffrey gets, but 22 for 128 against Cleveland last week with 5 catches also. The only concern with someone like this is game script. They're 8-point underdogs to Minnesota, but that hasn't mattered for Robinson. They pretty much stick with him no matter what, and if he does needs to get some catches, that happens. But 7,300 still seems too cheap for Robinson.
DraftKings is showing 10, by the way, for the spread.
Oh, is it up to 10? I looked. I looked a couple days ago, but yeah.
Which is working the wrong direction for Robinson. But for how much they use him. And we were saying like they're keeping themselves relatively close in games. He's the reason why. Like I don't think. For a $2,000 difference, basically from the upper price guys, like I think that's a decent amount of money. Where was your thought after seeing the pre-game talk about how Eckler was going to be worked his way back in and then had a career high in touches?
Career high, like it's. Granted, he was always a guy that never got a ton of touches, but. 25. He had 16 targets in that game.
Yeah.
11 catches, 85 yards. He didn't really do a lot with the carries. He was 14 for 44.
Never does.
I wonder he never does. And you wonder maybe you get some Joshua Kelly in there. But we were wondering like how's it going to look with Herbert and all that, and it looked pretty darn good.
Pretty good, yeah.
You have Austin Eckler in any league you're playing in or in DFS last week. He clearly had no issue meshing with Herbert, and His targets are just huge in PPR, and comes with a guy who can break one anytime. It's not like a dump off like you get guys that like J.D. McKissick gets a bunch of stuff. Doesn't really do a ton with him. Where the PPR can rack up, but you got to have the 10 catches or whatever it is to work. But Eckler can break one anytime. If he's gonna get 16 targets, like that's just nuts. They're playing New England this week, and you got to think New England's probably going to slow this game down a little bit. Bill Belichick's usually really good against rookie quarterbacks, although their defense is really bad this year against the pass. But he ended up with a really nice game. He was on a lot of teams that won a lot of money last week, and I probably wouldn't have done it just because I was a little worried about the touches. And maybe when we hear limited touches, like with him and Jordan Reed earlier in the year, we should just play those guys and figure the coaches are full of it.
Yeah, completely. I think those two are definitely the ones that I would consider going after. Like, I feel like you need like the perfect situation for Aaron Jones, particularly when you have other guys like right here that are in his price range that like I don't find any reason to play Jones. Like, if anything, I'm much more interested in Rodgers than I am Jones this week. And so I think he kind of falls out. Josh Jacobs.
On that note, real quick though, the Rodgers 1-yard touchdown stuff is getting insane.
Yeah.
The Packers have 9 1-yard rushing touchdowns. Rodgers has thrown 6 of them. They have 3 for running. Like, you're clearly just trying to get him stats at that point, right? Like, you can just hand it to Aaron Jones. He's great at getting in the end zone. They're clearly trying to get Rodgers and Devontae Adams as many touchdowns as possible, it feels like.
Well, we were talking about how many end zone targets Thielen gets, and it's like, well, hold on a second. But anyway, we'll get to them.
Yeah.
But so Josh Jacobs hasn't practiced yet this week. We're recording this Friday morning, so they haven't practiced Friday. But if he doesn't play, and we're skipping significantly, like we were saying, like Cook is probably going to play. But if he didn't, like you still have to pay $6,900 for Alexander Mattison. But if Jacobs doesn't play, you can get Devontae Booker for $5,500.
And it was funny because we mentioned we said some negative things about DraftKings when they put Davis at 4,000 a few weeks ago. They bumped up Madison 1,500 or Booker 1,500. Booker was 4,000 last week.
Yeah.
And didn't do anything. I think he was like 5 carries for 5 yards, but Jacobs got the ankle in the second half, and they did bump him up to 5,500. So I was like, oh, here we go. We're going to get Booker for 4,000. I clicked on his name. I was like, oh, 5,500 is like not as exciting.
Not when there's a much more exciting $5,500 player we can talk about.
Oh, boy, we're going to get there. Jacobs has 206 carries this year. One of them is for 20-plus yards.
It's like the anti-Nick Chubb.
The anti-Nick Chubb is a word. Hashtag to our friend Vlad Sedler for that stat. He had that on Twitter. I didn't want to steal that. But one 20-yard run. And every time I watch Josh Jacobs, he looks slow to me. And I'm like, he looks kind of slow. And I'm like, oh, maybe he's not. I'm like, look it up. He ran a 4.640. So it's not like he's burning fast. Like, that's fast for normal humans, but not for, stud running backs. But I don't know. You watch him like go on like an edge sweep or something or anything. Like he just doesn't. You're like, oh, that's gonna be 6 yards, and it turns into 3. So it's just like you're looking for that burst, and it's not there. And granted, the usage is good. If they get up in this game against the Jets, obviously they're gonna hand it to him a ton if he plays. But not playing Wednesday or Thursday is pretty significant. But
we have seen them give him the ball a ton though.
A ton. Like if he's there, they're going to feed him, and that volume is king in this game. So great game script. He's just not dynamic, but I think the volume, everything works pretty well. But I like the other guys we mentioned more. And I want to talk about Nick Chubb real quick. 7,700 on DraftKings, 8,700 on FanDuel. Over 100 yards the last 5 games he's played. So in week 2 against Cincinnati, Nick Chubb was 22 carries for 124 yards. That's his worst yards per carry on the season. That is wild. His worst. That's 5.6 yards per carry, which is really, really good. Like if you're above 4, like you're doing well. If you're above 5, like you're really, really efficient. 5.6 is his worst game this entire season. That's incredible. Incredible stat. Like it's just, and I saw that. I'm like, there's no way. And I actually took out my phone and did the calculator on some of the games. He has he's like a 5.6, a 5.65, and a 5.7, but regardless, all of them are above 5.5 yards per carry in a game. Like he has not had one stinker of an efficiency game. And the main issue with this game is they're 5.5 point dogs to Tennessee, but Tennessee has not had anyone over 85 yards since week 3. But man, Nick Chubb is awesome. Like he's probably my most fun guy to watch run right now. Like I just love watching him play. Like every play he's making someone miss, then he outruns somebody. Like he kind of is the perfect combo of that. And 5 straight games over 100 yards in games he's played the full game. Like I think at 7,700, I think Nick Chubb is very live for me again this week. So I just pulled this up. There of all running backs who've had 100 rushing attempts this season,
So we're trying to take out some of the riffraff here. So Chubb leads the NFL amongst those guys with 6.3 yards per carry on the season.
Okay.
There are only 4 other guys over 5.0. Like, and he's a full yard and a third above that.
And he hasn't had one game where he's like, he was 20 for 87. Like, right. He hasn't had one of those. It's wild. He's just one of those guys that can hit the big one, but doesn't, and has a lot of like 2-yard carries, turns into 6 yards, which is like, it's just huge for that kind of stat.
To cherry pick a stat, he's only rushed 20 times twice all season.
That's pretty. And there's been a lot of Kareem Hunt. Last week, he played 41 snaps last week, which is the most he's played this year. I think as we go along here, I think it's very evident that Nick Chubb's a better football player than Kareem Hunt. Which is start of the year wasn't like, people were like, you can kind of 50-50 them, and it's pretty clear who's a much better player.
Yeah, I cherry picked 20 because he's had 3 games with 19, so that helps.
But it's a good point.
But yes, he's awesome.
A lot of like heavy volume kind of games. I don't think you're going to get that. There's always a little bit of risk there that he does have that game, but man, dude's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. I want to hit Kamara real quick because I feel like we hit a lot of things, we missed a lot of things, kind of the way that DFS works. But like we perfectly nailed that Kamara's play last week. He was like, what was he, 8,200 or something last week? With Taysom Hill again, he had 1 target again, and they didn't drop back a lot. Like, and whenever Hill did drop back, Hill had like 78 passing yards or something. There's a number right in there. But it's the red zone, it's the end zone and red zone looks too, and like they're using Latavius Murray. Kamara's played less than 50% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. Like, this is a problem. Like, he's talented and can do something at any time, but you're going to get me less than 50% of his snaps, not the red zone goal line carries, and not catching passes. And it's hard to build a formula where Kamara hits unless he breaks a 40-yard touchdown at some point.
Even against the Falcons.
I know, right? The matchup is so good. Like, I love anybody against the Falcons, but I don't know if he's not catching passes. He's taught 15 carries once all year.
Yeah.
And usually with the passes, they're like, he's winning 10 targets, so we're great. But I don't know the way they're running the offense right now. They had like 28 dropbacks last week or something. No, they had 38 dropbacks a game with Breeze, and they have 52 total in Hill's 2 starts. So like after that first quarter or the first half, the first game against Atlanta when Hill did nothing, they kind of switched the offense up, and I don't know. Maybe at some point Peyton will game plan to get the ball in Kamara's hands, and maybe they're easing off the gas a little bit with him because they may not need it against Atlanta, but. I don't know. I find it hard to play him right now, which is weird to say because 3 weeks ago he looked like he was a top 3 running back.
Yeah, that game last week basically was like out of the 40s. Like there was no quarterbacks, and
it was so bad.
I just even if like I totally get the whole like I'm going to play Kamara because nobody's playing him, and it's like I don't even think that's worth it this week. Like I just don't see it.
No, and we just mentioned 5 guys in the 7,000s, like right around the same price. If he would drop down even more, sure, but
yeah.
I think I can make a case for the other 5 guys over him pretty easily, and it's weird. It's just.
I mean, there are plenty of guys below him that you can make a better case.
There are too. So let's jump down to below him. We've got a few guys here in the 6,000. I think are interesting. Miles Sanders 6,700, DeAndre Swift is 6,500, and they cleared him off the concussion protocol yesterday. On the same day that Adrian Peterson said he's really concerned about him, and he hasn't seemed like himself lately. Like, what a weird. Like, it was like back-to-back notes too on like all the sites, obviously on RotoWire. But like I crossed him off. I'm like, that quote is terrible. And then all of a sudden, an hour later, like, he's off the injury list. So we got Chris Carson at 6,300, who didn't practice fully yesterday. Was a little bit limited in practice on Thursday. What are you doing in the 6,000 range? Is there anybody that like jumps out to you that you really like in this area?
Carson did. The limited practice, I think, is being just chalked up the fact that he missed 4 games, and they just don't want to overwork him during the week.
Yeah.
But like we were talking about, Cook and Henry have the 2 highest implied totals in terms of their team totals. And they have a decent spread. That fully applies to Carson. The Seahawks have the 3rd most implied points. They're 10-point favorites, or at least the last time I checked they were. I can't imagine it's gotten closer yet, 10 points.
And they have clearly made a shift the last couple of weeks to go back to this running game. Like it's we talk about Russell Wilson, but they have my concern with Carson is he only played 25 snaps last week. He looked good though. He had that touchdown run that was like beastly touchdown run that was on all the highlights. It was on Monday night, so everybody saw it. But he was only 8 for 41. Carlos Hyde played 41 games. He's also limited in practice.
Okay, he hasn't practiced at all yet, I don't think.
Yeah, like he was not at all. So
he didn't practice at all.
and Travis Homer's hurt. So I wonder if that was just a first game back thing for Carson. And he had a really nice kind of wheel play out of the backfield that Wilson threw a great pass to him. So he's obviously super involved. Giants haven't allowed a 100-yard running back since week 1, which kind of surprised me too. Their defense has come on a little bit. I think that they staking their claim for the NFC East there. Great setup, great game script with the big favorites. I'm a little wary with the usage last week, but it could be that they were just kind of easing him back in, which makes sense.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that they were easing him back in. There was one of the ridiculous quotes from Pete Carroll this week about how much better they are when it's like a 50-50 split. And I was like, oh, well, that was nice.
Did you see the quote about our formula is 50 carries plus completions? That's how you win football games.
Yes, that's how you win.
I was
games.
like, well, if Wilson throws 60 times, you're going to get there, right?
Yeah.
But that made no sense. Like, okay, so if you pass the ball and run the ball a lot, you're going to win. Like, it was the weirdest stat. I was like, I don't even know where that comes from.
Right. It was clearly he saw it and took the complete wrong conclusion from it. But it was like, no, this is. I mean, it's the idea of like teams that win games do it because they run a lot, and it's like, no, they run a lot because they're winning games. Like, but anyway.
I wanted to send him like Joe Burrow game logs where he threw the ball 68 times and be like, yeah, I don't think it works that well.
So in terms of like potential playing time issues, you have to be much more comfortable at Carson at 6,300 than Cook at 9,500 if somebody's like possibly not getting as many touches as you want.
Yeah.
So I like Carson. I think his salary range is a little tough. Like we talked about Booker if he plays. And then obviously we have the lock button this week that nobody will ever regret playing.
Right.
Of 5,500 David Montgomery, who has never failed us and will certainly never fail us in the future. So, but yeah, I think Carson, I think most people are going to take one of those cheaper guys, as amazingly as that sounds, at least in cash games, and probably one of the expensive ones. I mean, we went through 6 of them that we all thought were very good. So I think Carson's kind of in that weird range where he probably isn't going to be all that popular in cash games, but I mean, he's got plenty of upside for GPPs. Certainly if they're going to try to give him the ball more and not let Russ throw as much as possible.
Yeah, he looked really good. We mentioned that touchdown run, but kind of looked pretty fresh and good. I want to talk real quick about Miles Sanders. Guy that's talented, but the Philadelphia offense is a mess right now. And the way he had 8 touches last week against Seattle, and that wasn't a game where they were down 21-0 in the first quarter. Like that game was, I never really thought they were going to win the game, but like the game was close enough where your running back should have been phased out, and he had 8 touches. Like I think it's safe to say he's their best player on offense. He's their most dynamic player on offense. I mean, their receiving core, Alshon Jeffrey looks like me running routes right now. Like it's brutal. It's hard, and he's playing instead of Travis Fulgham, who looked good. I'm a little shifty, but the breakaway speed is not quite there anymore. But Sanders, Green Bay struggled against the run. They are allowing 167 total yards a game to the running back position. They gave up 103 to the aforementioned David Montgomery last week, which says a lot right there. Jonathan Taylor had 92 weeks ago, and Dalvin Cook and Ronald Jones had big game against them fairly recently. Sanders has a lot of upside. It's a good matchup, but man, this offensive line is an absolute disaster right now. We're going to go through sack numbers when we talk about defenses later, and the Philly all-line is an absolute mess.
And like we knew that from the beginning of the season. Like I remember like that's what everybody was talking about, was just that line was so bad and obviously hasn't gotten any better. So
and it's gotten banged up too on top of that. It's just Lane Johnson, it's just like every time it seems like he's hurt. It's just it's rough. I mean, they just always have guys limping off. I mean, I think the first play last week they had an offensive lineman get hurt, and you're just like, oh my gosh, you're the curse. So I like Sanders as a player. It's hard for me to do it against that offensive line in a game that they're decent sized underdogs. It's hard to get there, but man, he's a guy that can break one anytime. It's hard to build that case even against the Green Bay defense.
Do you think Doug Peterson's worth trusting ever again after the Jalen Hurts talk?
No, and I think Frank Reich suddenly looks a lot better for that Super Bowl run. Like Peterson makes some weird mistakes, and they do some strange stuff. And yeah, the Jalen Hurts thing is weird. Like he came in, completes an out on the sideline, like a pretty nice looking pass, an easy play that's set up for him, but a nice looking NFL pass. And then they take him back out. He didn't come back in again. So it's like we're going to get him snaps, and by snaps you meant one. Like I don't understand. And Wentz looked horrible in the first quarter, and Hurts comes in to start the second quarter. You're like, all right, here we go, and then, or maybe not. It was so strange.
It was the total opposite of what he had intimated earlier in the week. Not even intimated. He said it. The idea was like we're going to give him a few plays. It's not going to be these like one-off plays with like Wentz on the field. Like they're going to let him do it. And he completes the pass. Like, okay.
And it was funny, like you see the sideline, there's like three guys who are like really fired up about the completion, and you could tell there's some guys in there that want to see Hurts, and then he was just gone. And Wentz is of course Wentz like didn't play well, and then gets the Hail Mary at the end of the game where he like his stat line all of a sudden was like a top 10 quarterback. You're like, I don't know. It's just it's so.
You mean the best or the worst backdoor cover in the history of the NFL?
And then they went for two. Did you see the letter that someone wrote to Roger Goodell saying that it was like the whole thing was fixed? I'm sure Goodell's on the phone to Peterson and be like, dude, you got to go for two right here.
You got to go for two, yeah.
Like, stop that.
Complete the Hail Mary and then go for two.
It was funny because I played the Monday Night Football Showdown, and I was nowhere near catching, but I kind of looked at the top, like right at the end, and there were 360 teams that were tied for the top spot, which you get in that showdown, right? And then the second to last play, Wentz completes a dump off to Boston Scott, and a guy had a unique lineup winning $1 million.
That's amazing.
So he had Scott and like the other, so jumped ahead of those 300 teams who were built without Scott. And then they throw the Hail Mary, and another guy jumps up top of that with a unique lineup too for $1 million. So the guy that had the $1 million was probably watching because he probably knew he was up there. The Hail Mary comes, he dropped from $1 million to 500.
There is something like just crazy.
You don't sleep for like a week if that happens. Right?
To finish with like the fourth highest scoring lineup, but
right.
To finish 367th or whatever it was.
Yeah,
that's a bummer.
It was brutal. But so David Montgomery, you mentioned as we're getting down cheaper here. Big game last week. He was 11 for 103, 5 catches. I think was the key to that game. Is that he had the 57-yard carry in the first drive and didn't do much running. He was kind of David Montgomery after that. Was he 10 for 46 or something? But the five catches were really nice. They were trailing all game to Green Bay. They are favorites this week against Detroit. Great matchup. Detroit's allowing 165 yards per game to running backs. There are 21 touchdowns scored by running backs so far, leading the NFL in giving up touchdowns. He's always hard to trust. It was a little cheaper than I thought it was going to be. I thought he was going to be maybe 62, 6,300 and get me off him a little bit. But 5,500 on a slate where we don't really have a lot of easy, cheap running backs. Got to think he's really popular this week.
Yeah. I think it's almost like they did a survey and they're like, what's the lowest that you would, or the most that you would pay for Montgomery in this situation? If you're like, I would never pay 6,000. And they were like, okay, how about 5,500? Come on, you can do it. I've mentioned like numerous times on this podcast all season of like these blind stacks that I do, and Montgomery just like explodes out of it. So, as ridiculous as that sounds,
it's the first time David Montgomery's exploded on anything in the NFL.
He looked good. Like he looked good last week. Like not even just like, oh, the stats were like, he actually looked like a better running back somehow. Like if you told me it was somebody else in the Montgomery uniform, I could kind of believe you. The other guy who kind of jumps out even a little more than Montgomery, only in terms of like game situation, is your boy Jonathan Taylor. And then obviously he has significantly more or two running backs on his team that could take work from him.
Yeah.
So Montgomery, I think, has 140% of the Bears touches from running backs this season. But Taylor profiles decently well. Like, the Colts are favored against the Texans. I think it's the 5th or 6th highest total. He's only 5,700. It's not, I would never play him in cash, but somebody might be stupid enough to win money with him in a GPP.
And running backs against Houston has been a very good formula all year long. Obviously missed last week with the COVID list. His girlfriend tested positive. I don't have a report anywhere. I looked last night. I don't see a report anywhere that he tested positive. So at least in terms of like recovery and how he may look and touches, I think that's pretty significant, pretty important. He's not actually coming off it. Now that doesn't mean that they didn't report it or whatever it may be, but it sounds like he didn't actually test positive himself. He was a high risk, close contact. The other running backs in the situation make it really hard, but he had 22 carries last game he played. Like he was 22 for 90 against Green Bay. We mentioned that earlier. 47 snaps. So it was weird that like after 21 and 17 snaps, suddenly they boosted him back up. You're right. There's nowhere you can play him in cash because who knows what's going to happen there. But in a GPP setup, if you want to shift away from Montgomery and go with someone who's obviously talented, but he could certainly end up with 7 carries like that. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. It's probably probable the way they do it, but at that same price, if you're looking for someone to get off of Montgomery and you want to be a little different in GPP because Montgomery's going to be popular, Kenyon Drake is 5,700 against the Rams. The Rams defense is good. They allow 3.8 yards per carry, but Drake had 22 carries last week, only 70 yards, but 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns are what's important to me. The way Kyler is playing right now with his shoulder, they are not having him. He had 5 carries these last 2 weeks, which is dropped way down. They're not having him run the ball, especially in the red zone. If Drake's going to be the guy, and they're pounding him in the red zone when they do get there. I watched that game, and it's clear that he's the guy when they get near the end zone. Like, even the second one, it's like, all right, let's just get a 1-yard touchdown here. He has, since he came back, he has 57 touches to Chase Edmonds' 27. So he's clearly, like, the guy when he plays. Like, we thought it was, oh, here's Edmonds, he's going to explode. And then all of a sudden, well, maybe it'll be 50-50 now he's back. It's been, like, 2/3 Drake. So I think that Drake at 5,700 in a matchup that doesn't jump off the page, it's not a great matchup. The Rams are, a good defense. I think he's mildly interesting as a pivot off Montgomery.
I like that call. It certainly makes sense. Trying to see, I kind of expected that total to be a little higher, but maybe
I did too.
I guess the Rams defense has been strong enough that they feel confident.
I still thought it was low.
Yeah. I think a healthy Kyler might be a little higher, but
yeah. I still feels low to me. It's not like the Arizona defense. Jared Goff looked terrible last week, but
he is terrible, actually. That's all it is.
Jared Goff cannot play the 49ers. It's the weirdest thing. Like, every time I'm like, oh, God, here we go, the Rams. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Jared Goff can't play football against us. So let's jump into the passing game. But first, a note from our sponsors at PropSwap. Smart sports bettors always know where to find the best odds before placing a bet. And that's where smart bettors use PropSwap. You can always find the best odds on PropSwap because you're buying directly from other bettors like yourself. You see a ticket you like, but you think the price is too high? Submit a bid for a price you think is fair, then buy it. PropSwap sellers are always willing to negotiate, and we all know bookies never will. And for a limited time, our listeners can get up to $500 in bonus cash. Use the promo code ROTO500. That's promo code ROTO500. And PropSwap will match your first deposit up to $500. Become a smarter sports bettor today. Go to PropSwap.com or download the PropSwap app. Before we get to quarterbacks, Andrew, I jumped the gun a little bit there. Do you have any cheap running backs you like this week? There's nobody under Booker that I was really interested in, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't skip that if you had anybody you want to talk about there.
I thought we at least should say the name Giovanni Bernard just to make sure that we don't play him. He's the only one, and I was trying to see what the Dolphins are supposed to be doing, but I'm not sure that's really a situation I need to buy into at this point.
Yeah, I agree. If we get to the point where Ahmed doesn't play and Myles Gaskin's a full go, I might think about that. That'd be the only path I think I would take. Gaskin's 5,900, so it's not like he's that cheap. It's hard to go Gaskin with his first game back over over Drake, over Taylor, over Montgomery. It's just hard to get there. If he was 4,900, sure, maybe we could get a little creative, but I didn't see much under 5,500 I like this week, and so that's why I jumped forward. But I want to make sure there was nobody I was missing there.
Frank, no, I'm good. Sorry.
A lot of touches.
Why does he have so many touches?
If you're in a season-long league, Frank Gore is like a flex play right now. It's wild, but he just is. Quarterbacks. Quarterback is interesting to me this week. We got 3 guys up at the top here: Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, and Kyler Murray, 77, 76, and 75 respectively. I think there's cases to be made against all 3 of them. I like Deshaun Watson the most of this group, but he lost his best receiver this week. He lost Will Fuller 6 weeks for a PED suspension. And if you look at the stats when Fuller doesn't play, Deshaun Watson's stats go down. It's actually I think it's 16 games that Fuller hasn't played, which obviously it's Will Fuller, so that's a lot. But in that chunk, he goes down, a certain number of yards goes down, his YPA goes down. Fuller's a really important weapon for him in this offense. I still like Deshaun Watson a lot. I think he'll get it done. Maybe he has to get his legs involved a little more. And the Indy defense didn't look really good last week. They gave up Henry killed them, and Tannehill was over 10 yards per attempt too. So it's not like they stopped the pass. He didn't have to throw a ton because Derrick Henry ran for 8 yards every carry. But Aaron Rodgers was really good the week before that. So I like watching most of this group, but I was curious your thoughts on these 3 guys.
Excuse me. Finally, we have Watson priced where he should be. 1 week after he loses his best receiver. You have to think that the poor games that he's had without Fuller include games where he had DeAndre Hopkins too. It's not like
that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
He still had a very, very, very good receiver to throw to.
But he's got David Johnson there instead, so that's all right.
Right.
Boy, that trade does not look good.
Yeah. So we mentioned that Murray obviously is clearly hurt and playing through it. So playing him against the Rams just doesn't make sense to me.
And he's just not running the ball. That's he's so good and runs the ball. And if he's gonna have 5 carries a game, it's really hard to play him at the price.
Right.
He can always go off. Don't get me wrong, but I need to see him run the ball and feel comfortable. And you could tell last week he did not look comfortable.
And you're now relying on him to throw against arguably the best secondary in the NFL. So
yep.
And Russ, it's Pete Carroll that is the reason you don't play Russ, just because if
100%.
if they really are going to try to run more, then that takes away from Wilson. So, yeah, I think.
And you mentioned Carroll's crazy quotes. He had the one. He's like, "I coached terribly in the first quarter." It's because he went for it twice on fourth down when he should have gone for it.
When he should have gone for it, right?
So they're punting from the 38-yard line at some point this week.
Yeah, like Carroll is like, is he the best bad coach in the NFL? Like, is he a good coach? I don't even know.
I think so because I think guys play their butts off.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah,
and I think you always say like that is like in the NFL. Like, if you can get these adults to play that hard, I think that really matters. And he always gets – you see guys that, like, teams lay eggs out there. The Seahawks never lay eggs. They never quit at games. Like, before they're going to come back, they seem like they play really hard for him. And I think that's where Pete Carroll's value is, not in the absurd quotes he had.
In actual football, right.
He really had, like a bunch of, like you said, 1965 quotes. You're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, it was –
So, yeah, I don't think you need to play any of these guys. But the group right below has some really interesting options, to the point where, like, I think, like, I still don't know which one I like the most. But I'm embarrassed that Kirk Cousins is one of them. So,
me too. Don't be embarrassed.
So, obviously, we talked about how much he throws to Thielen in the end zone. He didn't even have him last week when he went 307 and 3 touchdowns. So 3 straight games with at least 292 and multiple scores. And it was weird to see that they didn't have Thielen last week, and he threw a season-high 45 passes, like out of nowhere.
Yep.
But I think the group is basically Thielen, Herbert, and Rodgers. And I think Herbert has to be last only because of this ridiculous Bill Belichick against rookie quarterbacks thing. But, like, I think if we didn't have Cousins or Rodgers, you'd probably like him more. But, like, Rodgers just seems like such an easy play.
Why is Rodgers 6,800?
He's got the little Deshaun Watson in him now.
But why? Like, his touchdowns last 6 weeks: 4, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. Like, what about his stat line or anything recently that he's done puts him at 6,800 right now? I couldn't believe that. I actually thought last night I was going through, I typed stuff. I thought I typoed it. I'm like, oh, he must be 7,800. And I actually went back and looked. That's how bad I thought the price was.
So I wrote up the Packers-Bears game. And it's like, well, I know Rodgers is having like a good season. There's like MVP talk. And I'm just like, has it really been this good? And like the number of 3 and 4 touchdown games is nuts. Like, it's not like you see guys like every so often have 3 or 4. And he has more games of 3 or 4 than games with fewer. And like 3 touchdowns is a lot. Like, it's not like it's nothing. I think he's easily the most popular quarterback this week, and it's just a matter of whether you play him with Adams or not.
Yeah, the price just jumps off the page so much compared to those top 3 guys. You're just like, this is weird that he's here. I mean, his YPA is up a full yard per attempt from last year. Last year was at 7.0. This year's at 8.1. It's just been a different – and he has Alan Lazard back, who, is not an explosive guy, but another guy that, if you need a 12-yard completion, he's there, and that matters when you're trying to build stats in a game. And he's got MVS running deep routes. He's got Adams, who catches 416 passes a game. It's just he's got Aaron Jones in the backfield. He's got Jamal Williams in the backfield. He's got Tunyon looked good last 2 weeks. If they're going to continue to throw the ball inside the 5, I think he has 14 touchdown passes of less than 4 or 5 yards. Like, this is an absurd number, but. And granted, a lot of that we're like, oh, he's getting stats for him, but he's really good in that area too. Like, he makes the right decision. You can trust him to make the right pass. He has that like just pinpoint sidearm pass to Adams. You're like, well, I guess they run it because it's impossible to stop. Like, I get you make fun of it. You're like, why don't you just run it? Well, it's like, well, that's essentially like a run. Like, it's just so easy. But,
it's odd to me that other teams don't double Adams like at the line from the 1 yard line. Like, just
every
actually
time.
Make them run it.
He runs that little out, and you're like, oh, another touchdown. Like, why don't you just play for that? Like,
just get another guy in there.
If I see it on tape, the defensive coordinator, I'm sure there's all kinds of complicated stuff I don't get, but like, I don't know, make them do something different.
Yeah, I mean, football can be very complicated, but that seems fairly easy.
Yes, like make them run it. Like, it's obvious they can do it. Just make them run. I mean,
right.
Of course, sometimes the guy's covered and he fits it like a little teeny window anyway. But yeah, I mean, Rodgers, I think is going to. I agree with you, fully highest owned quarterback, but. Herbert, you mentioned the thing with Belichick, good versus rookie quarterbacks, but like this is a different Bill Belichick defense. They lead the NFL in a bad way with 8.3 yards per attempt against quarterbacks. The 2020 Patriots are not a team that I'm scared of at all. They're a nice matchup. The Pats played Kyler really well last week, although I don't think that. I think that was like 60% Kyler. The total is only 47. Is my concern in this game. It's hard to see New England getting in a game like back and forth the Chargers here, which is when we like Justin Herbert. We like Herbert when they, the defense is giving up a lot, but with Cam playing, kind of slow and boring, the total's only 47. That's kind of what got me off Herbert a little bit. Usually I'm all over Herbert. He's been great. The last couple of weeks have been a little slower. He's like 6.1 and 5.8 YPAs. It's not been quite as efficient, but I just worry a little bit how this kind of game trudges along a little bit compared to most Chargers games.
Yeah, I just think from like an optimal standpoint, why are you paying more for Herbert than Rodgers?
Agreed there. So let's jump down to Kirk Cousins, 6,400. I was hoping the difference between him and Rodgers would be a little bit more to make him a little more enticing because it's hard to click on that. But you mentioned the 3 straight games, but he has an 8.6 YPA in the season. Like he's been really good all year. He has 2 great weapons now. He has Thielen, he has Justin Jefferson, who is an absolute beast, by the way. I think it kind of comes down to what they do with Dalvin, though. Like if they ease off Dalvin in the third and fourth quarter and throw a little bit more, if Jacksonville can stay in this game, this is really a situation where the game script and the score at halftime is going to be really a huge factor in whether Cousins has a big game or not.
Yeah, totally. I think you put it. I think that perfectly describes it. I was like, I actually saw Cousins' price before Rodgers's. Like I don't know if I was looking at our optimizer or whatever it was, and I was like, Cousins 6,400 is pretty good in this matchup. If Cook's banged up, blah blah blah. Rodgers must be 7,800. Like,
yep.
Okay, maybe I won't play Cousins this week. Like, not that I'm like ever looking for reasons not to play Cousins, but like I'm not going out of my way to like get more Kirk Cousins in my life. But Rodgers makes it pretty easy from an optimal standpoint not to play him.
It does. I will definitely have Cousins in GPP lineups. Jaguars allowed multiple touchdowns in 5 straight games. Like their defense is terrible.
Yeah,
they're bad. They're banged up. It's like a bad combo of everything there. Those are kind of the quarterbacks that I was considering this week. Down a little bit lower, we've got Ryan Tannehill's mildly interesting at 6,200, but then I see the price compared to Rodgers and Cousins. You're like, how do I get there? But he hasn't been really good lately. But his highest total on the board should be a good game flow back and forth. So you got to always look at the quarterback in the highest totals. You got Baker Mayfield in that game too, who was on the $1 million winner last week. Even though he didn't really do that much, it was a Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry stack that won the $1 million, which is absurd and insane. But sometimes it happens. When you go that with Tyreek Hill and I forget who the other big receiver was. We had Justin Jefferson. It was and Derrick Henry. That was a nice build right there. Then you got Taysom Hill at 6,300, who did really well against Atlanta 2 weeks ago, but man, 78 passing yards last week, and he has to score 2 touchdowns running for it to work. And I'm not going there 6,300. I could see it working against this Falcons defense, he went 18 for 23 against them a couple weeks ago. Like he was actually pretty good against them 2 weeks ago, as opposed to last week where he was pretty bad as a passer. But he's just too close to Cousins and Rodgers, I think, for me to get there this week.
Right, like the Rodgers Herbert conversation is the same as the Taysom Hill to Cousins. Like I just don't see it happening. I don't think there's an easy pay down option. Like obviously cheap quarterbacks always have some sort of risk to them, but like
Derek Carr thinks you're crazy.
I mean, Derek Carr has one of the best matchups possible, but I mean, are you really gonna play Derek Carr in a game that they really like probably don't even have to throw much in?
Last week was bad.
It was
22 of 34 against the Falcons with no touchdowns like that. And they got blown out.
Yeah.
That was the weirdest game. Oh, it was so strange.
But it's kind of the game that we expect Carr to have more often than not. Like it was actually the surprising games that he becomes the part of the conversation.
You mean every time he plays the Chiefs?
Right.
It's so strange.
Right. Exactly that.
I think quarterback is pretty kind of straightforward this week. I think there's if you want to pay up, for me, it's Watson. But like Rodgers, Herbert, Cousins, like kind of seems the way that I'm going to go with most of my lineups.
Would you have played or at least considered Daniel Jones if he was fully healthy?
Probably. You had the call last week, and he kind of came out looking good, and he connected with Evan Ingram and looking good. But I'm certainly not doing it with Colt McCoy. And that Seahawks defense is gotten a little bit better. Like you can kind of see that they're changing how they play a little bit, and they've been a little bit better the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I probably would have thought about Jones if he was like 5,800 or something this week.
Trubisky?
I saw a couple of things like the value, like a value meter where like Trubisky was like the best value for the price. If I'm going to do it, I think I'm just going to go with the receivers in this game against Detroit instead of Trubisky. I don't think I can trust the dude.
I completely agree. Certainly from a cash perspective, there's no way I'm playing Trubisky in cash.
And he's 5,400 on DraftKings. The price has moved up since last week. I don't hate getting a piece of this game, kind of going back and forth a little bit, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to take a receiver or, a couple receivers we'll talk about. I think that's the path I'm going to take if I want a piece of that offense.
That's fair.
So let's jump into pass catchers. I think are really interesting this week, a lot more interesting than quarterbacks this week. But first, a note from our sponsor, BetMGM. Sports bettors know that magic happens when you turn a hunch into action and apply the right amount of expertise. That's why BetMGM has teamed up with RotoWire to offer new BetMGM customers a free 6-month RotoWire subscription when you place your first bet. Register on the BetMGM app or website, and once you place your first sports wager, receive a season's length of RotoWire's unmatched sports insights. Find out why BetMGM is the king of sportsbooks by signing up and placing your first bet today. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years or age of older to wager. Colorado, Indiana, New Jersey, Nevada, Tennessee, and West Virginia only. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, Nevada. 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey and West Virginia. In Tennessee, call or text the red line at 800-889-9789. If you or someone else you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Promotional offer not available in Nevada. So we talked about Aaron Rodgers a bunch, which means we have to talk about Devontae Adams at wide receiver. He is the highest priced guy with a very, very good reason. 9,000 on DraftKings, 9,500 on FanDuel. Darius Slay, who would guard him normally, didn't practice or limited practice yesterday with a calf injury, so that's a note there. Although he probably didn't practice because he has nightmares of DK Metcalf just abusing him all night on Monday. It was crazy.
Held him out of the end zone.
Yeah, sort of, because he dropped the last pass. When Darius Slay fell, like it's just DK Metcalf is a freak. But Adams has scored in 6 straight games. In that stretch, he has 9 touchdowns. It's not like he's haven't won a game. Over 100 yards in 3 of the last 6. Hasn't been under 50 yards since week 2, and that's because he only played 28 snaps due to injury. Not much I can say about Adams. He's a beast. He's great. He gets a ton of targets. He has a great MVP level quarterback. Just a matter if you want to build with the $9,000 is kind of what it comes down to with Adams.
Single-digit targets in back-to-back games.
Oh, there you go. You found a little something there.
Well, I think one of the problems is that when you're so busy catching 1-yard touchdowns, you can't catch a 30-yard pass from the 1-yard line, Scott. So
yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah. So I think he's fine. I actually don't think he ends up as like an optimal play. I think you're more like you're better off just playing Rodgers and not paying $9,000 for a wide receiver. Like he obviously, from a cash perspective, is like it's most reliable you can get. I think he actually may be more helpful to a cash lineup than DK Metcalf, even though Metcalf is like just an absolute monster. Like the consistency, I mean, Metcalf is 8,200. I assume that's the most expensive he's been all season for a classic slate. Yeah. So, I think if you're not playing Adams, you're not playing any of the top like 4 or 5 wide receivers. Price wise.
You mentioned single-digit targets, but those were 8 and 9, so there's not like he was.
I think it was 9. I thought it was 9 and 9 actually.
I had 8 and 9, but close enough that it's. He's just really darn good. And the problem with Metcalf this week, you mentioned that 8,200 for the price this week, highest price, but you can never like take a receiver out because of a cornerback. Obviously, we saw that him with Darius Slay. But James Bradbury's for the Giants have been really good. Yeah. Metcalf killed Slay last week, so they're going to take deep shots to him. It's clear in that offense that when they do throw right now, it's over the top to Metcalf. It's Metcalf at all points. Like he's just dominating everything right now. You wonder how much Seattle will have to throw, how much they want to throw in a game where they're a pretty decent-sized favorite against freaking Colt McCoy again. Like this is not a Daniel Jones who's not great, but like can put up some points if you need to make some big plays. Like it's hard to see Colt McCoy, who I thought was like retired 4 years ago.
I'm shocked he's still in the NFL.
I was at the Rose Bowl when he got hurt in the first quarter. I was like, oh, it was like championship game too. I think it was Texas, Alabama. And I was like, this is going to be a great game. And Colt McCoy got hurt in the first quarter. And I'm like, oh, great. We're going to sit here and listen to Alabama fans talk for 3 quarters. It was brutal. If I had to hear that
classic Rose Bowl of Alabama. Texas.
If I had to hear that Yellow Hammer Rammer Jammer song one more time, I was going to jump off the Rose Bowl. But it was whatever the championship playoff, it was ever that season was. But you just wonder with Metcalf like how much they're going to have to throw. Like it's just if they get up, it's clear that from Pete Carroll's crazy quotes that they're going to want to run the ball. And if they're up 23-6 at halftime, like are you going to get 14 targets for DK Metcalf? I just don't think you do. I mean, the guy's awesome, can go off at any time. I would not argue against playing him if you want to, but I don't think it's an ideal week to do so this week.
Yeah, I agree.
The other guys up here, we've got Keenan Allen 8,100, DeAndre Hopkins at 7,800. How are you feeling about those two this week?
I'll take Allen over Hopkins any day, but I also think I'd probably skip both of them.
I think I do too. Just this game with the Chargers and Patriots, I just don't know where it's going to go. I would play Allen over Hopkins too. Hopkins with Kyler struggling. He has 551 and 555 the last 2 weeks. Like, it's hard to pay up for that. Likely to see a lot of Jalen Ramsey. They don't move Hopkins around the formation very often. He kind of is like that guy on the left outside, and still seems fully priced. And if Kyler's not 100%, I have a hard time getting there. Yeah,
no, I totally agree. I mean, Thielen was the most expensive wide receiver that I was seriously considering.
Okay. Before we get to Thielen, AJ Brown 7,600. The guy's a beast, but 4 or fewer catches in 5 straight. Grant, he scores a lot of touchdowns. If I'm going to pay up in this range, I think I just want more volume.
That's exactly how I look at it. Like, volume, like touchdowns are just way too variant, and volume is just much more consistent for most of these guys. So at least from a cash standpoint, AJ Brown's almost like never in consideration.
So it's funny, we talk to this sense of guys. Adams was the one guy I had bolded that I really liked this week, and obviously it's easy to like him. But I have no one until we get down to Thielen that I bolded again. Then I have like 5 guys in a row that I really like at the price. So talking about Thielen, are you Thielen over Jefferson then this week for $400 more?
I was really there's no reason they should be further apart, but I was like really hoping that I could get Jefferson a little cheaper. But I mean, they both not that you can like throw last week's game out for Jefferson, like 13 targets, but like if Thielen's there, Jefferson's probably not getting 13 targets. Like, it's as simple as that. The concern in this game is obviously that they get up early and then they don't have to throw as much. But with the amount that Thielen gets looked at in the end zone, they're both like big play guys. You don't really see it that often where like the top 2 receivers have like double-digit ADOTs, because usually one of them's a little closer. It's like the opposite of the Rams, who have like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp run 5-yard outs every time. But I think just for the price, because theoretically there's a little more touchdown upside with Thielen, that I think he just makes a little more sense than Jefferson.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked last week about Jefferson. We're like, it's real. Like, the end zone targets have to go to somebody. He had 2 all year, and then he got 2 last week. Yeah. So it's like you could see that when they drop back, it's like, oh, Thielen's not there. Let's just boom, go to the next guy. I just love watching Jefferson play. Dude,
he's really good.
Like, what a great pick that's trying to be. I like Thielen and Jefferson this week. They're close enough that you can kind of go either or, whatever you want to do. The price difference doesn't make that much of a difference where that would factor in for me. Right under Thielen, we have Calvin Ridley at 7,200. They scored 40 points last week. Like, if you just were out, apple picking or so whatever people do in the fall on the East Coast.
That's exactly what we do.
Exactly. I last time I was there, that's what I did. So I just figured you guys are doing that every week, like those apple cider donuts and just hanging out and drinking your coffee. It's perfect. Calvin Ridley, if you looked at the score, you're like, oh my God, the Falcons scored over 40 points on the Raiders. Calvin Ridley must have gone nuts. 6 for 50, he had a touchdown, 9 targets, but it's a little bit disappointing when you consider how many points the Falcons scored. 9 targets each of the past 2 weeks. He was 5 for 90 against New Orleans in the same matchup 2 weeks ago. Good game script. They're a 3-point home dog, indoors at home. Julio Jones was kind of at practice on Thursday, played a little bit, was limited, but was back in the scene, so I think he might play. I don't know. I'm kind of feeling Ridley this week, but I feel like it's more like a feel than it is anything else.
I am like really, really close to never playing a Falcon again.
I think that's a pretty smart way to live your life.
And I might just not play anybody playing them as well. Like, the number of times I've gotten killed by either playing Julio or Brian Hill or Hayden Hurst or Matt Ryan or anyone playing against them.
Hill. Oh, yeah.
I just think it might, just for my own like personal well-being, I think I'll just never have to do it again. And so as long as Calvin Ridley plays for the Falcons, I'm not sure I have to play him.
And you joke about it, obviously, but they're just a really inconsistent franchise. Like, you just don't know what they're going to do on offense or defense week by week. And it's Matt Ryan either throws for 0 touchdowns or 4. Like, there is no rhyme or reason to a lot of their stuff. And you joke as a point, but like they're really inconsistent. Like in a DFS setup, it's hard to predict what they do every week. I get that. I mean, Julio's 6,600. Like, you see that price on Julio, and you're like, if he plays his last 4 full games, 8 for 137, 2 touchdowns, 8 for 97, 7 for 137, and 554 and a touchdown. Like, when he plays, he's the guy that's really damn good. Like, I think I might drop down to him at 1,600 if he plays with the thought that when he plays, he's great. But like, I worry about him getting hurt then too. Like, I can't figure this team out. I think maybe your idea might be the best one.
If you told me like those 4 best games were the last 3 seasons, then I'd believe you. I
promise you I didn't make up the game log.
I believe the games happened. I'm just not sure they all happened this season.
It seems like you turn on the game and Julio's limping to the sideline, like at every point. No matter, even in those games, you're like, oh, 11's in the blue tent. Like it's bad for your blood. I guess if you do it, you play him, just don't watch the game.
Well, they also seem to happen after a great play. Like he'll get like a 35-yard catch and you're just like, here we go. And then he gets up a little gimpy and you're like, again. No,
I feel bad that Julio Jones and Noah Fant are now in the same bucket.
No, I just
Noah Fant's the king of the 30-yard play, then straight to the blue tent.
Yeah, I don't think you need to play him. I think there are plenty of receivers even below them that you can play. Like Ridley and Julio, I think are always worth like a GPP stack. Although coming back with somebody from New Orleans feels awful at this point. But like. With the Vikings guys priced around there, Allen Robinson, you can question Trubisky all you want, but like Allen Robinson himself is an elite player. There are way more guys that I would just rather play than having to put myself through the Falcons.
I do want to talk about Allen Robinson. You mentioned him, but coming back in this game, can you even think about Michael Thomas at 7,000 right now?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either. He had a good first game with Hill against Atlanta, but I think there's just too much in this offense to figure out that. Michael Thomas has topped 51 yards once this season.
Yeah.
He was hurt a long time, but still,
yeah.
Yeah, if you took him in the first round of a league, that has not worked out well.
Well, like there are other quarterbacks that I feel like you'd be okay. Like if Colt McCoy was starting, you'd be like, maybe. Jameis, certainly we'd play him.
For sure.
But
yeah, I'd be Thomas 7,000 with Jameis. I'd sign up right now.
Yeah, but like we have like literally the one quarterback where you're just like, no, I have no interest.
When you have a tight end throwing in passes, that's a problem. Sorry, FanDuel. Allen Robinson, or anybody that was upset about that, I didn't mean to joke and open that wound. Allen Robinson against Detroit. Allen Robinson has double-digit DraftKings PPR points in every game but one this season. Really consistent, a great floor guy. Targets last 2 weeks, 9, 9, and 13. He's been under 50 yards twice all year. Granted, he doesn't have a lot of huge games, but he doesn't have a lot of stinker games either. Good matchup, though. Detroit's bottom 7 in fantasy points to wide receiver ones. Will Fuller went bonkers against them. He was roided up last week, went 6 for 171 and 2 touchdowns. Sorry, Will. DJ Moore was 7 for 127 the week before. McLaurin had 95 yards the week before that. Like, they are giving up big chunks and big yards to receivers. 6,700 and 6,900 on FanDuel, too. I love Allen Robinson on both sites this week.
Yeah. Thankfully, we can play him instead of Ridley or Jones.
There you go. It's a good point. I see the upside of those two guys too, but Allen Robinson's a way more consistent player right now. We skipped over Tyler Lockett. I assume we just can't play him at 7,400 right now, but if you're ever going to do it, a week where James Bradbury's playing Metcalf and the Giants have been beatable in the slot in the middle of the field, I wish he was a little cheaper off these bad games. Since the 200-yard game, he's topped five catches once, and he's topped 70 yards 0 times. Like, it's just – he went 15 for 200 and 3 touchdowns, and it's just been dead quiet for a month. It's weird. Lockett's
the player that you play every week and just hope that the week he hits, that you're not bankrupt before he hits. But he makes a great GPP play. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
He's a really good player with a great quarterback, but the way they're running the offense right now, I don't think I could do it at the price. I was hoping he was going to be under 7,000. Maybe I would get suckered into him, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I want to drop down to a little bit cheaper. Is anybody else in the 6,000s that you want to play this week? The size of guys we talked about.
I assume some people will try to play like Devontae Parker. We kind of casually mentioned him earlier, but
I do have him. Sorry, I had him in the next tier, but yeah, you're right.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, go with him.
I mean, he just is significantly better with Fitzpatrick. So like if Tua starts, I just have zero interest in him.
Yeah, he has a big chunk of Miami's targets. Like when they do throw the ball, he's clearly the guy. Preston Williams is on IR. The Bengals have allowed 75 yards to 8 receivers in the last 8 games. So like a lot of guys have been eating against Cincinnati. The game script's a little concerning. Like if they get up in the second half against Brandon Allen, they may just run the ball. But it's not like their rushing offense is one that you can like lean on. So it's I think the Parker's a fine play, 6,400. But under 6,000, got a couple guys right in the high fives. I think interesting. Robert Woods again is 5,900. against Arizona. His targets, he has 27 targets the last 2 games. He's got 19 catches, 210 yards and a touchdown. Like, he's just, you talk about a floor play for under 6,000. That's Robert Woods. Like, he's just really solid. You're probably not going to get a huge explosion games, but like, he was really good against Arizona last year with Patrick Peterson playing. He was 13 for 172 and 7 for 67 and a touchdown last year. I think he's a really good play under 6,000. He's one of my stronger guys under 6K.
I agree. He definitely jumps out.
Like, I take him over Cooper Kupp, who's $200 more, because Cooper Kupp, you might get 2 for 30 or you might get 14 for 1. Like, he's so all over the place. It's wild. I mean, Arizona's been killed by slot guys, so there is that. Cole Beasley, Tyler Lockett, that huge game. Jamison Crowder had 116 yards against them. But I just think the way they run their offense, I think I just go Woods and save the $200, and I think it's a better play.
Yeah, I think I always end up like, I think Robert Woods is just a better football player.
Yeah,
for the same price, he gets the sporadic rushing attempts. He doesn't get quite as many as he was getting before, but like, they obviously like the ball in his hands, and Kupp is fully reliant on Jared Goff getting him the ball. So
at 6,200, how about a guy in the highest scoring projected total? 8 for 143 and a touchdown last week. Big numbers. The clear number 1 on their team. No wind, supposedly, this week in Cleveland. Nice game script, 5.5 point underdogs. I present to you Mr. Jarvis Landry.
So, like, we put Landry in that group with Devontae Parker and Brandon Cooks of, like, guys who have, like, really, really stable floors, but like never really hit their ceilings. And then obviously Landry shattered that last week. Yep. So, I mean,
his price went up 1,000 though.
Yeah. I think like he obviously makes plenty of sense. I just always don't want to play Jarvis Landry. As simple as that. How about that?
I understood. And price up to 6,200. I think there's just other guys that I would like go to for. And do you really want to play Jarvis Landry after he hit his ceiling? Like, right. It's hard to go back to that. If you missed it, if you played it last week, props to you. If you didn't, it's hard to go back to it.
It's funny. I was going to say, like, if you really love Nick Chubb this week, you're not going to play both of them, although both of them crushed last week. So I don't know.
I have nightmares that Mayfield's going to miss him by 14 feet open in the end zone. I'm just like, that'll make my stomach hurt. So I probably won't go there. Yeah. You mentioned Brandon Cooks, 5,600, still priced in a great spot. Obviously, his price came out before the Will Fuller news, so he went from wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 1. So do you play this as like, oh, he's got more volume, I love him, or do you a little bit worried that like maybe more attention gets played to Cook without Fuller out there?
I mean, he's had 10 targets in the last 2 games combined, which is kind of a bummer.
After a really good run of targets, too.
Yeah, so like I think there's some hesitation. You can have some hesitation there. The Colts, I thought, were a good defensive team until last week, but I think Cooks is fine. Like, I'll say it like every week about him, particularly in this price range. Like, I don't think there's any reason for him to be more expensive. This whole like, well, he's the number 1 now. And it's like, right. Let's at least actually see some number 1 targets first. I don't know. I think he's fine.
Do you think Cooks will be under-owned this week because everybody in the world is going to be playing the wide receiver 2 for the Texans?
No, I don't think he's going to be that low. Okay.
I just wondered, like Kiki Kuti we'll get to is 3,500, yeah. And now the wide receiver 2 with not only Fuller but Randall Cobb is on IR too. Like, I think a lot of people are going to play Kuti, and I just wonder if nobody's going to play both these receivers. I wouldn't think, but unless you stack them with Watson, maybe you really go all in on this game. But against Indy, you're probably not going to play both Houston receivers. I just wonder if Cooks maybe slides in a little lower than we think just because of Kuti's ownership.
No, I just don't think he's like projected all that well anyway. Cooks like. I think that there's legitimate concern that like Watson is not as good without Fuller. And so if you're just getting a bigger piece of a smaller pie, then is that worth targeting? I mean, you're not paying that much anyway, but still.
So dropping down a little bit here, there's still a lot of receivers I like. If DJ Chark plays, you've got a game that we like Minnesota to score a lot of points against Jacksonville. He returned to practice on Wednesday. He was limited on Thursday. Could be a nice run back in this game if you want to get something on the other side of this. My thought on this game, though, is like I think I'd be more interested in some of the cheaper guys if Chark doesn't play than I would have with Chark at 5,400. I think it was the kind of way I laid it out strategically. But he has 25 targets the last 3 games. He's kind of the guy when he plays. Only over 60 yards once in the last 6 games, but that was a big blow-up game. He had 7 for 146. Good game script. I just think that at 5,400, I probably like other guys more. And then what I want to do is Chark not to play and then go down to the 3,000s and play some of those Jaguars receivers.
Yeah, I mean, he's not that expensive, but like you're still looking at the guys in the range of like, all right, if I don't play Chark, do I play all the guys we just talked about? And you're looking at like who's throwing the passes.
Yep.
And you're like, do I want to take the guy catching passes from Mike Glennon or the one catching passes from Deshaun Watson or the one catching from, I don't want to put Goff in the same category as Watson, but like, if you look at that, like I'm not sure how much you really want to get into this Jacksonville offense.
Yeah. So we mentioned Jarvis Landry. I've got a guy that is also in the highest scoring game on the Vegas total. He's $2,500 less than the other receiver on his team. Double digits PPR points in 8 of 9 games at 5,100. Over 65 yards the last 3 games. I weirdly really like Corey Davis this week at 5,100 on DraftKings.
Jerry Donabedian wrote Davis as like a start in his start sit
nice
column.
Right.
He had an upgrade this week. Davis, I don't think I've ever played Davis, and I don't see this being the week that I start playing him.
I never play Corey Davis, and this is the week I'm going to start playing him. I think 5,100 is a really good price for a guy who has a good floor and does have some upside. And a game that is the highest total in the slate. If I want a piece of this game, this offense, it depends if I play Derrick Henry, obviously. If it's be a non-Henry lineup, I'm going to go Davis for $2,500 less than A.J. Brown every single time for sure.
From a talent perspective, maybe not even talent. I mean, they should be that different though, right?
Yes, I love A.J. Brown. Probably one of my favorite players to watch. Like touchdown last week was insane.
Right.
I just think when you get a similar floor, Davis might even have a better floor because A.J. Brown has to score, but I mean he can. He's really good. I just think 2,500 is if I want a piece of this game, I'm going to do it this way rather than with Brown. Just I think that whatever I can do with the rest of my lineup and still get some piece of this high total. I think Corey Davis 5,100. I think it's a really good play this week.
So Tannehill, Davis, Landry.
Yeah, I'm not doing that, but I definitely like Davis in a if I'm stacking other games and I want a piece of this one.
Okay.
I think Davis is the if you don't play Henry, I think Davis is the best price out of all this mix. Like I take him over 1,100 cheaper than Landry too.
Right. Okay, that's fair.
Right underneath him, we have Michael Pittman, who a couple weeks ago came through for us with a touchdown. He's 4,900. He's back under 5,000. He was 2 for 28 last week, but had 9 targets. Like, thanks, Phillip Rivers. Like, where are you throwing the ball? But Houston, just on as a defense, we want to attack. We talk about running backs against them, but receivers, I mean, you get up 130 plus yards to a wide receiver in 3 of the last 5. Not just 100, but 130 plus. Close spread, high total. The total's like 51.5. Now the second highest total. I think if I'm going to play a Colts receiver, it's, Hilton played well last week. We made fun of him, but he played well last week. I think it's definitely Pittman for me at 4,900 if I'm going to play someone in this game.
He's fine. Like getting into the Colts offense. T.Y. Hilton, the cheapest wide receiver 1 on the slate.
He was 3,900, I think, last week. Is he over 4,000 now?
43.
I think I still go Pittman. I think Pittman just
you don't go anywhere. You don't need the Colts. Not when Jonathan Taylor's going 25 for 130.
There you go. And they've got like 7 tight ends they throw the ball to. Like it's a frustrating offense to have a part of. But if I'm going to do it, I do like Pittman. But
they didn't just throw to their tight ends. They give them some rushing attempts too.
They do. It's a weird, strange offense. But we get cheaper here, which is always the fun part of receivers. You looked at lineups. You look at these winning lineups. You always see one cheap receiver. In order to get lineups in, you usually need one of these guys down here. We talk a lot about Denzel Mims. You're a Jets fan. He's kind of the most exciting thing in the offense right now. But we talk about him, but he's worked. Like, he's been good the last 3 weeks. He has 62 yards, 71 yards, and 67 yards in this offense last 3 weeks. Those are really good lines. He's not scored, so he hasn't hit the big splash number for people, but he's still only 4,100. 8 targets each game the last 3 weeks. I think Mims is just – and he had 8 targets a game with Sam Darnold last week. We worried a little bit that maybe Darnold would go to Herndon and Crowder and kind of go back, but he went to Mims. Mims is talented. He looks good. He plays the part. I just think it's a good game script. He had 8-point dogs to Vegas. Vegas is not someone I'm worried about at all. He get up some 100-yard receivers, 3 in the last 6 games. Like, I think at 4,100, Mims is still really playable again.
I'm biased enough. I mean, 3 straight games, double-digit fantasy points on DraftKings, so you can have that.
And in the 3,000s each of those 3 games, he's been. If you've used him, he's worked for what you wanted him to do.
Given how much we like Rodgers, MVS at 300 more is not there for you?
It just seems weird that he was so uninvolved last week once Allen Lazard came back. I mean, he had 0 targets last week on 56 snaps.
Really? I'm looking
0.
at 6 targets, 55 yards. Was that 2 weeks ago? That was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, he was 355 against Indy. Last week, he played 56 snaps, had 0 catches and 0 targets.
Yeah, that's bad.
Considering the first game, Lazard was really... I mean, I guess Lazard played the week before too, but I don't know. MVS is a guy that's going to either hit a big 60-yard touchdown or he's going to not be a good play. And then a GPP, when you like Rodgers in the game, I mean, that can certainly work. I just... I don't know. I don't trust either of them because Lazard gets these short passes and plays a lot and sees a lot of action but doesn't do much. And then MVS got hit the big play. But I like Mims more. I certainly would play QT over MVS, I think, at 3,500. So it's hard for me to get them like other guys more. But yeah, if you want to hit a big splash play, MVS is the guy in this offense that does it.
The only other guy that I'd want to discuss here is Josh Reynolds. Theoretically, if Woods and Woods and Cup get a lot of the attention from the Arizona defense, then theoretically that opens Reynolds to go deep. But I mean, it's 6 targets in that offense isn't bad. So at this price is fine, but I think he's worth at least throwing in this group.
Yeah, I do too. I think he's 4,200 this week, and the targets have always been there. And he clearly is the guy when they do chuck it down the field a little bit. It is to him. Every time you see Goff throw the ball deep, it is number 11 that seems to be the guy that they're throwing it to. But we talked about QT a bunch. 7 targets last week, only 27 yards. I think he's a guy that a lot of people play because his name's been out there. His name is picked up in Fab this week in season-long leagues. He's the number 2 guy in an offense that can't run the ball, frankly. The Houston can't run the ball. They're going to throw the ball a ton. Their best players, their quarterback. 3,500. I don't know how chalky he'll be. I imagine it's be pretty high. Good game script. They're 51.5 point total. They're a small dog. It all works. It's key QT, and he just kind of catches short pass. He probably has to score to really work. But you get a bunch of targets with a good quarterback. It's hard to be too against us at 3,500. Yeah,
well, I think you laid it out pretty clearly. He feels like somebody who should be 3,000. Not 3,500, so I almost feel like I'm overpaying a little bit.
He scored a couple weeks ago. I think that bumped up his price.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Oh yeah, he did. He did. Yeah, he stole Cooks' touchdown.
It was really an annoying touchdown at the time because I think we both played Cooks that week.
Yeah, and if you told me Cobb scored in that game too, I'd believe you.
He did. He got hurt on the play.
Yeah. What do you think about Darnell Mooney? $100 less.
So I had, as I got down here, whenever I see a receiver that is going to be popular, I always want to get someone different. And I looked at Reynolds, I looked at Mims. The Jacksonville guys will cover in 1 second, but Mooney is the guy that I also had bolded here. That was a good call. I like that. 9 targets last week. He was only 3 for 34. Mitch Trubisky will do that to you, but I think he's a guy who had 5+ targets in 8 of the last 9 weeks. He had that one really bad game 2 weeks ago. He only had 2 targets, but 11 and 9 sandwiched between that. He plays a ton of snaps. He's going to be in there. Hasn't had 70 yards, but I like to use him on some deep shots. I like the targets. I like the price. I like the matchup against Detroit. I think he's a really interesting way to maybe a little bit different, get away from QT at the same price.
Great. Love it.
I like it too. If DJ Chark does not play, we got 3 guys down here. And this is a game where Minnesota's going to score. Jacksonville's going to have to throw the ball a lot. Mike Glennon looked fairly serviceable last week, if that's the biggest compliment I can pay him. Keelan Cole's 3,800, Laviska Shenault's 3,600. Colin Johnson, who had a big game last week, is 3,300. He was 4 for 96 on 8 targets. He had 13 targets all year, and then he had 8 last week. It's hard. I wish there was just one guy down here that you could play. If Chark doesn't play, who's the one guy? Is there anybody in this mix? I think for me, it'd probably be Keelan Cole at 3,800, just because he seems a little more involved consistently than the other guys. But Shenault's a talented rookie, and maybe he gets a couple end around kind of things. And Johnson was good last week. Do you touch this if Chark doesn't play?
Did you play Cole last week?
I did.
You did, right.
3,600, and he's 3 for 44. It wasn't good, but put up 7.5 points for me, and on a lineup that worked out really well. He was a piece that made the Mahomes and Tyreek Hill fit, which obviously was massively important.
That helped, yeah. Colin Johnson is just the latest example of a wide receiver down on the depth chart who picks up when they change quarterbacks, because
that's a good point.
Glennon would be throwing to him in practice because they're both playing on the backup squad. So He makes sense. Like similar to the Titans, like how many points do you think Jacksonville actually has to be down before they give up on James Robinson?
A lot, and it's got to be like midway through the third quarter. Like,
right.
They don't do it early at all, but it's got to be, you're looking at, 28-6 with 7 minutes left in the third quarter. Maybe they fully give up on it, but I think it has to be that extreme.
I think just for how much volume we see Robinson get in this offense, that like trying to pick out one cheap wide receiver on a team with, they're just names to me at this point. Particularly if Chark doesn't play, like I guess you could. They're all kind of equally whatever. And so it all just makes me want to consider Robinson even more. Like, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if it was like I said, one guy, it'd be more interested, but like picking between 3 guys is really hard. And we've got like 4 guys down here that we mentioned under 4,200 that we like. So it's not like I'm, really begging for guys down here. So I just don't think I'll do it just because there's other options that I think I like more.
Right. All of them being cheap almost makes it impossible. Like if Chark was 6,000 and Chenault was 5,000 and Cole was 4,000, and then we got the 3,000, we're like, okay, I'm going to go with that guy.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Yeah, I'm good.
I like your Darnell Mooney call a lot.
He's very good. He's the clear example of like what happens when you have a horrible quarterback.
Yeah, it's no doubt Trubisky's bad, but Trubisky could chuck it a little bit too. I like that.
Yeah, that's definitely
he'll
the plus.
chuck it, make mistakes more than Foles will, which I do like as the Jameis Winston model. I think
exactly.
Tight end this week. We have no George Kittle. We have no Travis Kelce on the slate. They play on Sunday night. Darren Waller's the top guy at 6,100. We got a couple of guys bolded at tight end, but it's just same. Tight end has just been rough this year. We have not had like those guys that emerge, and Kelce's been awesome. Kind of every week been really good. Kittle got hurt, but like Darren Waller is over 50 yards once in the last 7 games. Like kind of disappointing there. Like he's the guy in this offense, but he's 4 for 23 last week against Atlanta when everybody liked him and everybody wanted to play him. A lot of targets, but it's hard for me to get to 6,100 on Waller right now.
I just don't, from a cash point perspective, I just don't see how you ever play Waller.
How do you play Waller over Robert Woods?
Over anybody. Like I
cherry picked a name, but like we talked about 5 guys in that range. Like I'd play all of them over Waller, and Waller's great for a tight end, but like in DraftKings, like they're the same price. You're gonna have to. It's just you only get a certain amount of money. I'd rather use it on the receiver.
Right, for a tight end is the key. Like just because a guy is the best player at his position, at least on this slate, doesn't mean he's a good play. And so
people get sucked in on season long. Like Darren Waller's an obvious play every week, and it's just not the same when you have to build a lineup with salary cap. It's just a different game.
Yeah, totally agree. And it forces you, obviously, because of the salary, to like play a Jacksonville third wide receiver in order to get Darren Waller. And so they're all like, I think you can make reasonable arguments for Evan Ingram, but like at 4,900, how much am I really getting over Mike Gesicki at 42, Goddard at 43? We could have Ertz back. I would be perfectly fine with Tanyan again at 37. These are all just guys that are in their outcomes are all probably within 5 points of each other. And if you don't have the one who finishes with 9 and you have the one that finishes with 4, it's not going to kill you.
Yeah. TJ Hawkins has been pretty good the last couple of games. He had 5 for 89 on Thanksgiving. He's 5,000 though. I think I still just save the money and go down to other guys you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the UF collective ownership projections, Waller is the second highest, which like these are definitely more GPP driven. So like I guess I get playing it. Who do you think the top one is?
Dallas Goddard.
No, Goddard is, I don't even see where Goddard is.
Wow.
But the top one is 2,900 on DraftKings.
Oh. I was going to say Goddard or Kyle Rudolph at 3,400. Who's 2,900?
Jordan Akins.
Dude, he was so bad on Thanksgiving. He killed me. He like dropped 2 touchdowns. Like that was so frustrating. I liked Akins at 2,900 on Thanksgiving too. And like,
I think you mean he had 2 targets close to the end zone.
He dropped 2 touchdowns is how I see it.
The Jamarcus Robinson problem.
Oh God. There are I guess without Fuller, maybe he gets more piece of the offense. And Akins is athletic. Like he looks the part.
Yeah.
I have 3 guys that I'm probably going to be playing. I have Goddard at 4,300. Really good the last couple weeks, over 70 yards in each game and a touchdown. Tunyon at 3,700. You mentioned 5 catches these last 2 games. Nice bounce back after a quiet couple of games. And, he's in with Rodgers and a good offense, and they use him in the red zone, and they like to throw touchdowns. And then my third guy is Kyle Rudolph at 3,400. Like, he's priced up from last week, but Irv Smith did not practice the last 2 weeks or last 2 days. And if he doesn't play, Rudolph was 7 for 68 on 8 targets last week at a really good price. He actually worked really well. I played him last week at 2,800. If Smith doesn't play and I want to get cheaper than Tunyon or Goddard, I'd probably go to Rudolph. But yeah, Akins without Fuller, I can see that too. I'm a little surprised he's the highest guy, but
it seems a little silly to me. But the Rudolph game last week was not because of Irv Smith being out. Like, that was because Thielen was out, and Thielen is back.
Yeah,
so
it's a good point. Smith, the red zone targets obviously go away, but yeah, no Smith and no Thielen was obviously it's a really good point. But I'd probably go Tunyon, Goddard, Rudolph with the 3 that I'm really considering though. It's Hunter Henry was good last week. Your boy, 10 targets, 67 yards, first time over 50 yards since week 3.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't see the reason to prioritize.
I didn't debacle this year. It's bad.
Yeah. Like, I just think similar to defense where, like, I don't think it's a position worth prioritizing, where if you are trying to if you're in a 2v2 with other players and the better player in your non-tight end one, like if you need $300 to go from one wide receiver to another and you're like, oh, now I can't play Gesicki, I'll have to play whoever. Jared Cook. Well, Cook's actually a horrible. Jimmy Graham, I'll even throw in. Like, I don't think it matters anymore.
Yeah. So defense is a sore subject with me right now. I had a really good lineup last week. I think we talked. DraftKings, my lineup was like 195. I played Mahomes and Hill. We talked about them a lot on the podcast last week. I had a 0 from defense. And as I compared lineups and clicked on the teams that did well, everybody had the Saints with 14 points, the Panthers with Jeremy Chin scored twice in 35 seconds or whatever it was. It was insane. The guy that won I think he won the red zone, had the Carolina defense. And I was like, you need to buy a Jeremy Chin jersey. He was 0.32% or something like that against the Vikings. It was crazy. But I had a 0, and it really mattered. You give me 12 points for my defense, and I would have had a really, really big week. It would have been really good. I'm not winning tournaments, but would have been a significant difference over what I won with the 195, which is a really good score. But you throw that in the low 200s, and suddenly you move way up the leaderboards. And the Cleveland defense was an absolute disaster. They had 0 points. They were terrible against Jacksonville. Myles Garrett didn't play, but the week before they had 14 sacks or whatever against Philly. But maybe that's Philly's offensive line. I may just miss that. But so we always say that it's hard to predict defense, but yeah, it's frustrating when it matters and you're on the wrong end of it for sure. Who do you like in the defense this week? I didn't see a lot of super cheap guys or super cheap teams, but there was one under 4,000 that's my favorite play. But I want to hear what you got on defense this week. So
there was a conversation in the RotoWire Discord last week that when all of the ridiculousness with the Broncos quarterbacks, everyone's like, well, you have to play the Saints defense. And somebody was like, if you play the Saints defense, you're completely relying on the Broncos not scoring any points, because if they don't have a quarterback, they're not throwing the ball that much. Even if they get behind, you just can't expect a lot of throws. And throwing is where defenses score points. That's where you can get interceptions, where quarterbacks drop back and there's a little more time to get to either sack them or force fumbles. That's where you get points. So the Saints last week had 1 sack and 3 turnovers, and they're like, oh, it's not that bad. But they left 3 points. And we always talk about points allowed really shouldn't be a consideration for defense, because it's just not enough points. But that's only because so few teams score under 10 points. The Saints defense has given up 3, 13, 9, and 3 points in their last 4 games.
That's wild. That's impressive.
They had 8 sacks against Atlanta, who they played this week, 2 weeks ago, where they gave up 9 points. But they're scoring double-digit fantasy points with maybe 2, 3 turnovers, maybe 2 or 3 sacks. But if you're not giving up that few number of points, then it makes sense. I still don't think they're a good play though. 3,600, it's an incredible run of not allowing a lot of points. That
it is.
That Matt Ryan has never let us down. So I think they'll bounce back. But I think there was no defense. I thought, like, I went right to the bottom, and I'm like, who can I get away with? And I don't see myself changing from that. And the one that I think I'm going to try to get away with is the Jets at 2,100 at home against the Raiders. And it's not like Derek Carr makes a lot of mistakes. They're not going to throw that much. But like maybe Josh Jacobs doesn't play and they throw a little bit more and the Jets aren't as horrific as I think, or just something stupid happens and they lose by 30, but they get a defensive touchdown and it's okay.
7 sacks the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Coming out a little bit. You're going to go super cheap. You gave me a bunch of sacks. I think that could be. I mean, I have 8 and 5 fantasy points last couple weeks, so that could be workable. I really like the Packers this week. 3,800 on DraftKings, 4,100 on FanDuel. They're like down a little bit. FanDuel like just stacks the defenses 5,000, 4,800. Yeah. Like they're like the 7th or 8th on FanDuel. So I do like that. The Eagles' offensive line is just an absolute disaster. Yeah. We always talk about like 11 sacks the last 2 weeks, or you had to cherry pick a couple weeks. Their sacks the last 7 weeks: 6, 5, 3, 4, 3, 6, 5. Like that is an insane level of getting Carson Wentz sacked. Like it's just every week he's getting 3 sacks. The lowest in the last 7 weeks is crazy. They had 3 turnovers also last week against the Packers had forced 3 turnovers last week against the Bears. They had 3 sacks. Carson Wentz will make a couple of really stupid plays at some point in this game, and sometimes those lead to touchdowns. It's a couple weeks ago it did for the Browns. 3,800. I think they're not super cheap like you mentioned with the Jets, but cheap enough that they are my favorite defensive play this week.
So we were just saying like you want quarterbacks to make mistakes throwing the ball or taking sacks. So Carson Wentz leads the NFL in sacks with 46, which is 11 more than the next highest.
That's a crazy number for 11 games of the season. That's wild. He
leads the league with 15 interceptions, and he leads the league with 10 fumbles. Like that's the quarterback you should be targeting.
It is like the exact formula that you want when you try and play defense. Playing defense is tough, but if you're gonna find a formula, like that's pretty much it. And under 4,000, I give me the Packers and I'll figure out the probably other. I think I'm just gonna go there this week.
And oh, by the way, they're 8.5 point underdogs.
So gonna be throwing a lot. And the possibility to take Wentz out, like you put a rookie quarterback in, like I think I'm probably okay with that too. Like yeah, I mean Miami's interesting this week. They're 4,400, a little priced up, but they played well against the Jets last week. 3 sacks and 2 turnovers forced, and Brandon Allen is just not good. Since he allowed a couple sacks, he had 3 turnovers last week, and they had 155 yards total against the Giants. So that's a game where Miami maybe holds them to not many points. But I'm going to take $600 less on the Packers and get more mistakes and more sacks, and probably just go there.
I agree with that. What are your thoughts on $2,500 against Trubisky?
The Lions just drive me nuts is what I'm usually thinking.
I think I've played them more than any defense because I'm just like, sure, they're against Cousins or they're against Trubisky or Foles. Yeah. And like,
they were against Washington a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I like that. And they just never do anything.
They're really bad, yeah.
Yeah, they have 14 total defensive points the last 4 weeks. What about Seattle? 3,300. This is a defense that we made fun of and ridiculed for like the first 10 weeks of the season. They have 19 sacks the last 4 weeks. They're facing Colt McCoy. They don't force turnovers, but if you get sacks, you're facing a backup quarterback, maybe that works. They're 3,300 on DraftKings. I could see that working in a game that they're going to get ahead a bunch. I just don't think the defense is still good, but they're pressuring the quarterback. Carlos Dunlap has changed his defense a little bit. Like he's definitely making a difference, getting a lot of pressures on the quarterback. But if I'm going to drop down, I could see Seattle. The Bears are 3,200. They have 9 sacks. The Lions have allowed 9 sacks the last 2 weeks, so you could see that working out against Matthew Stafford. But I think it's Green Bay for me, going back to them, and then Seattle if I drop down a little bit.
Sure, their defenses. I can't. I think we can. You could work yourself into an argument for every single one of them.
Yeah, you that's definitely true. There's some expensive ones I probably wouldn't touch, but I think it's going to go Green Bay this week and just call it a day there.
Yeah.
Anything else in this Week 13 slate that is on your mind you want to discuss?
No, I think it's a reasonable slate, unlike last week. I think I told you, like, the best decision I made last week was cutting my volume by, 80%. There was just, so many variables, and I was just like, as somebody who plays, mostly cash games, it was like, I don't feel good about this slate. The lineup I ended up going with was thankfully at 20% of my normal volume, so, I just didn't like it, but this week feels a little bit better at least, which is obviously what's going to happen on a David Montgomery chalk week.
That Tyreek Hill first quarter was a lot of fun though.
For you.
for me. It was he had 200 yards in the first quarter.
I just remember I was actually okay early on. Actually, I had Mahomes, but once I saw Hill, especially because he was not unowned, it was like, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, when you have 40 points in the first quarter from a receiver, that's it's going to be tough to get past that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday DFS version. We always appreciate that. If you could please rate or review the podcast, that'd be fantastic. Also, always good to leave a bunch of stars if you enjoy listening to us all year. You want to follow Andrew on Twitter? He's at RotoWire Andrew. I am at Scott Jenstad. Other than that, hope everybody has a good Week 13. We'll be back at you next Friday with Week 14. Hope you have a great weekend. Take care.